Anytime. Oh, is it? Yeah, we're ready to go. Okay, thanks. Let's wrap up Winnipeg here. While playing the role of Prince Charming in Cinderella, you sang, right? Your first singing?
Yes.
Okay. You wrote that it was a memorable occasion.
It was.
Yeah.
It was. Well, again, for John. And I was on the verge of leaving Winnipeg at that time to come to Toronto, and John said, "Oh, you got to stay and sing the Prince. You got to be my Prince." I said, "John, I'm not a singer. I'm okay, but I can do some gentle stuff, but really, He said, no, I love you singing. And I think it was all sort of fakery on his part, but anyway, it's probably because I wouldn't cost him anything or something. So I sang his Prince with a lovely Cinderella, Norma Vedabuncourt from Winnipeg, and a bunch of wonderful performers, and again, one of John Hirsch's splendid shows, I thought. And
you mentioned Norma Vedabuncourt. Was she a francophone local, a French-speaking local?
Not that I knew.
Okay, the Cercle Molière in St. Boniface.
Oh yes, Bob Trudell.
Tell me more about who and what they meant to the community.
I don't know that much about them, to be perfectly honest, although I knew they were there and they seemed permanent, And ironically, they provided for that segment of the population similar kind of had a similar kind of effect as the Montreal community, where they pretty much produce for themselves in the close circuit kind of theatrical community and television and film community and so on. But in that case, only stage, and they had they had a group of actors that did some very, very fine work. And Bob Trudell, one of the leading actors for the Cercle Molière, would come to MTC and do leads for them as well, including Italian Straw Hat. As a matter of fact, he was the lead in that.
It was really bilingual scene. When you left Winnipeg for Toronto, you went to work at the New Play Society, I believe, if I have that right. Mm-hmm. You worked then with Mavor Moore and so forth, Dora Mavor Moore. What were your... Obviously, you worked with John Hirsch. We've just gone into that. Was this the same kind of relationship you were looking for or expecting to develop here with guiding individuals, or were you much more on your own down here?
Pretty much on my own, I think. I was the New Play Society had been going on for a long, long time before that, and I really was in at the tail end of it. I think they'd even moved locations and so on, from a permanent home to a temporary place where, in fact, I had done some work for them. I certainly don't want to short shrift any of the people I was working with at that time here in Toronto, but it took a lot for me to drag myself away from the concept that Hirsch was really the best of his kind. I had difficulty working with a lot of the newer people. And it wasn't in any kind of ego or pompous way at all. It was simply, it didn't seem as put together. It didn't seem as, they didn't have the luxury of something, of just this very tight community putting on stuff to perfection. That sounds an odd way to put it, but it was different. It was quite different. I remember working at the Crest Theatre with the Davises and so on, and Charm. And I remember in one particular play, I was really quite out of it. I just wasn't coming across, and I couldn't seem to make a good enough connection with the director and whoever it was at the time. And I remember and I looked at the back of the theatre, and John Hirsch was standing at the back, visiting Toronto, obviously, and I saw him there trying not to be noticed, and you couldn't help notice him. And afterward, I said, and I waved him at the back, and I came off the stage after the rehearsal, and I went and I found him in a restaurant. I was going to meet him in the restaurant, and I found him there, and I went in, and I said, "John, you got to help me, man. You got to help me. I can't get a hold on this character, and I'm not being helped by the director. This is murder for me. I can't find, what to use, how much of myself to use, and if I need any of myself. Maybe it's a whole other application, a complete new character application. I just don't, you know, he has this, he has that wrong, or that wrong. And I did 20 minutes describing my spelling out my problems with this character. John was eating soup at the time, and he looked up. I said, please, you got to help me, John. John says, don't order the soup. That was all he said to me. I never understood whether that was wise or what exactly did John mean. Don't order the soup. But I think maybe I cut a fragment of sort of something that I'd seen before, such as maybe get out of the business or get off that stage or leave that play or do something. That he was quite funny. He hated to watch other people directing, just couldn't stand it. And on one occasion, as a matter of fact, over in Hungary, we were doing a film, and I was doing a scene, and the director asked me to do a scene, to walk up to my fiance's apartment. He said, walk slowly, do one slow and one fast. So I did both those. John, who could not stand to be standing in the background, but was there as a Canadian sort of liaison type person at that time with the Canadian Corporation. As we walked away, John said, slow was better. He needed to have his finger in there. He was good.
What I get from Don't Order the Soup is sort of like the mama wolf who doesn't recognize her children anymore, nudging them away.
Oh, that's all. That's about it, too. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, it's from 60 to 69 you worked with the Crest Theatre period. No, how could that be? I think they closed in 66. Anyway, you worked at the Crest Theatre. I believe your first production with Charmaine was The Madwoman of Cheyenne.
Yes.
Is that right?
Mm-hmm.
Do you remember your first impression of, I've asked her the same question of you, of Charmaine as the actress?
Oh, it was startling. I just adored her and just glowed. She had that particular kind of marvelous glow to her. And although it also, Kate Reid, Barbara Hamilton, Barbara Chilcott, a lot of people in that show. But and there was Charm carrying the thing and really doing an expert job. I enjoyed watching her every night and being with her. She needed to whistle on stage, and she couldn't whistle. And I said, I can whistle. So I stood in the wings, and she would make the thing, and I'd whistle from the wings. So that was our agreement. That was our plan. And I thought, oh, I'm practically controlling this woman. I can whistle a bit late or early or whatever else I want to do. I never did. I was a perfect gentleman, I thought. And every night I would go to her after the show, and she had a car, I remember, and we lived somewhat in the same sort of area, and I'd say, you're going straight home tonight. That became our hit song for the rest of our relationship. And
by the way, we get the impression that Leon Major and yourself, whom you respect as professionalism, you may not have had the same kind of working relationship you wanted. Mm-hmm. Less than an ego-boosting experience was how you put it.
Yeah, I don't know what that problem was, and maybe I was just getting to a stage where I thought, funny, maybe I'm not coming across, maybe I'm just not picking up. I thought I would be far more right for certain kinds of roles that were going straight on by me. I was not, and yes, I knew I was in a community where there were many, many more people to choose from, but I thought by that time it was an accepted thing that maybe I'd be right for things that I did not get picked for. And so I never really was able to figure that one out, whether it was some kind of favoritism or whatever it was, or maybe he just simply felt more comfortable dealing with performers he thought he could direct. But we did very little together. Yeah.
Was that the first time you worked with Kate Reid, by the way?
Yes, I haven't worked with Kate very much at all over the years. Just have known her a lot and a few jobs, but that was.
These two companies I've not seen much about. Do you know? Could you tell me about the Equity Showcase in the House of Hamburg?
Yes, House of Hamburg, early 60s again. I don't know the exact date now. George McCowan became a friend and a good director, friend of mine. He was putting on this production that I'd mentioned earlier called The Connection. Brought up a couple of people from New York off Broadway, and they put it on in a place called the House of Hamburg, which was down on Gloucester Street, just off Yonge Street, around the corner from Fran's Restaurant. And we became a habit around there, all of us, characters who were happy to be working for scale, whatever scale was then. And in a very adventurous little piece called The Connection by Jack Gilber. Don Franks was in it, Arch MacDonald. People took over from people, so you had along the way Al Waxman, Martin Lavatte, George Berdakis, a lot of local people, and Don Franks was one of the producers. He and Stan Jacobs produced it. That was the House of Hamburg, and then you went downstairs after for coffee in what was then known as the Coffee House, because there were a lot of coffee houses springing up all over the place. Well, Clem Hamburg was an old gentleman who liked theatre, liked music, and liked the crowds. So that was his place. And the other was?
Equity Showcase.
Equity Showcase. Well, they, I think, simply worked in whatever space they could get at the time. And this was one of the first, I think, shows they did as a showcase, a thing called Angels in Love. A very light, frothy, English, costume-mannered drama. Again, with some very good performers. And part of my education in working with Toronto performers and realizing the wealth that was here, even at that time, tremendous wealth of talent. It always has been. Yeah.
Can you comment on this quote, please? The Crest was a commercial theatre in a way that Jupiter was not. And although it succeeded in its way to give Canadian theatre workers valuable experience, the Crest veered away from the activist line, started by the New Play Society and the Jupiter. Activist in various ways.
Not my quote.
No?
No.
Right.
Don't even know about the Jupiter.
I don't think it was your quote. But I just wonder if you could react to that.
Jupiter was here.
The Jupiter was Lauren Green. They just did a few plays. The New Play Society, of course. These are groups with mandates, to do new or experimental work.
Oh yes,
Crest
yes.
Didn't. So, can you make actually a comment on the Crest then? Rather, what was their kind of mandate?
Well, I was not really. I think that I'd been there at the beginning. You've been there at the beginning when a theatre sprouts up or takes hold. I think you're in a much better position to see its reason for being and be able to judge the kind of way it's going and its reason for being. My feeling when I first heard about the Crest, for example, was that it was a professional theatre. I think I even heard that it was the only professional theatre at the time happening in Toronto. I didn't know much about Toronto at all, and I didn't know much about the kinds of theatres that were going on, but I did know about the Crest. I remember Frank Morris, who was a Winnipeg critic at the time, said, "Gordon, when you leave here, you must go to Stratford, and you must go to the Crest Theatre and see if you can work for the Davises and so on." So I mean, I was quite aware of it, but I couldn't have told you. I wouldn't have separated one theatre from another at that time. I was part of that thing in Winnipeg where, again, it would have been wonderful to have had much more original work. Local playwrights and so on. I'm not sure if we would have known what to do with them, because in fact our habit was to work on things that were tried and true and sort of set down, even though they hadn't been seen mainly by local audiences. I suppose the Crest then didn't make that much more of a difference to me. I saw them doing approximately the stuff, the same sort of stuff that maybe Hirsch would have chosen to do. So I didn't really know about the advent of theatres where devoting entirely to original works or anything of that nature. This was all very new to me, and as a matter of fact, I'm a little surprised that Jupiter and those people really had done that. I thought that didn't come along for quite some time after, but I guess there was a lot of writing going on here at that time. But,
not always local, by the way. It's a new place. It doesn't have to be locally produced. But,
oh, I see.
Written or anything. But they just have to be new.
Oh, yeah. Right.
Okay. Your first bite at Stratford was not so sweet, was it?
No. No, I had a completely different idea of what was going to happen to me as a performer at that time. And again, there's something, regardless of how much work you have to do on yourself to complete yourself as a performer and so on, there's that sense of somewhere in there's a little spot left over that you don't have to touch, you don't have to do much with. It tells you that you're good, it tells you you're ready, and just stand there now and wait for these marvelous things to happen to you. I didn't get that feeling. As I say, I didn't get it at the Crest when I first met a lot of the Toronto people here. I didn't get it. From the performing standpoint, I could see where it was, because it's very, maybe if they saw new people coming in or new faces coming in, their jobs would be maybe in jeopardy, who knows. So I have no idea what that kind of thing is, but it wasn't that way with the others. I felt that I was not coming through. Something was there. Something was there blocking it. Don't know what it was. I thought, okay, I'll solve that with an audition or two. Sometimes that worked, sometimes it didn't. Stratford, planned. It was so planned, 1 year in advance or 6 months, or even if it was only a week. The producer or the people in charge of a theatre as vast as Stratford already had their plans. They were pretty sure where they were going, who they were going with, and all of that. And the company was put together in their minds, and very little you could do to change that if you weren't quick off the mark, if you weren't there early enough. So in a sense, I felt a bit alien to it all. It's only a little bit of me, again, that spark, that spot, reserved for myself that said, that's okay, I'll wait my time. I'll learn my plays, I'll get my parts down, I'll continue on. It's certainly not going to dissuade me from a full, from my career. And I had the time, I had the youth at the time, so I was okay.
Yeah, Michael Langham, you worked with then.
Yeah, I liked him, but there was something, I don't know. I always thought that, maybe wrongfully, that this was a business that could allow compassion and I think understanding amongst people who believed in the same sort of thing. They're in this same sort of work. Some may last longer than others, some may be natural performers, some may have to put themselves together in a different way. I don't know. I was not enormously enamored with that sort of school teacher approach, and I always thought Michael was a bit like that. I always thought that there was that. I didn't want to be a whipping boy. I didn't want to be a student as such. If I wasn't good enough to be hired in the first place, don't bloody well hire me, It seemed to me there was that extra kind of thing to worry about in getting involved with big companies such as Stratford. I don't know. I always thought of performing as a searching thing, a happy thing, a compassionate thing with other performers on stage. That it would not be as go for the juggler as say tennis or something. That in fact it would be that. And that I never thought that acting was an endurance test or anything like that either, and having to wait forever to get things done. Maybe it's because I thought that I would shine through a little faster than I did, or something was there. It was just not clicking on, I wasn't clicking on all cylinders at times. And so instead of sort of being good at that, I sort of stepped back a bit. And I think gathered my forces to come around another area, another sort of angle to a career, a bit like a prism in a sense. And if I couldn't solve it one way, I'd go around the corner and solve it another. So I was always able to do that much, and thereby bypass some of the people and the individuals and the personalities that I thought were a detriment to my own career and to others around me. I've seen some people put away very, very badly. I've seen good talent, quit and go on pills and leave forever and never come back and hate the thing that they started out loving. And that bothered me greatly, you know. I remember once chastising, although he didn't really care if I did or not, John Hirsch later on. In fact, when he'd been very mean to, seemed to be unduly harsh with a few young actors and so on. And I remember saying to him at the time, "Why, John? What's all that about?" And he said then what he had been quoted earlier and saying, which was that I'm not running a Sunday school or something. I'm not running a school for, for gentle hearts or something. And I can see where, it's not an easy job to handle something like Stratford, but I never quite understood that mental brute force that had to be applied when people's sensibilities were involved.
Yeah, it's very interesting. It sounds like different ends of the education equation, whether it's you're taught and like cookie cutters, but or you are allowed to learn per se.
I think it's something that in fact should have been if you had personalities in your company, a company of 60 people for heaven's sake, if you didn't know them going in, enough to allow them to stay, then find a way for them to leave with some grace and some dignity. I never did understand the business of having great clumping companies moving around up and down tunnels and working out until they drove themselves crazy and allowed themselves to be simply put upon or dismissed. They were either there because they were going to be tomorrow's performers, or to some degree anyway, or find some way to work around them.
Take it from the general to the specific. Your singing debut at Stratford in the Scottish play, I've got it here, we know what that is, had pitfalls, and you faced some challenges in the role of a tree in The Tempest. Do either of these mean?
Yes, I was in the Scottish play, and the director had chosen to direct it as a Bruegel painting, as he said, where all bodies were touching coming on stage, whether they were a cluster of soldiers or actors or whatever we all were. And we barely got on stage at any given time because we were all laughing and corpsing backstage. We couldn't come on touching. But anyway, on one occasion there were 6 of us servants, and in Mac's Castle, and during the latter days of rehearsal, the director asked if anyone could sing, and I said, I said yes to anything in those days. So I was made the lead servant coming in. There were 6 of us standing in a row, and a particular actor was standing behind me, very funny. Louis Negan, his name was, anyway. And our servant lineup was made up of Louis Negan, Dinah Christie, John Horton, Tommy Kneebone, a bunch of us, and we're all sort of together. And I had to sing this little song to welcome Duncan to the castle. And Duncan comes up out of the tunnel. The birds are twittering. I'm about to start my song. Opening night, Stratford. But we were standing so close together you could hear everybody. You could feel everybody through your own body all the way down this line. And Louis Negan in my upstage ear said, on seeing Joe Shaw come up out of the tunnel, said, "That's a king." Well, I was gone. I mean, John Hirsch would have been proud, because I was destroyed. And the voice that was not too huge in the first place slipped back to this very thin little sound. And he wouldn't let it go at that. His second line was, "That's not the king, I've got the king's picture." So all this on stage, opening night at Stratford, right in the upstage here. And again, as I said, we were all touching, so you could feel convulsions going through all of the actors. I was in terrible, terrible shape. Plummer was playing the Scot. He came to me after about 8 shows and said, "Gordon, are you going to sing that song or not? Because that's my cue to come on." I said, "No, I'm not going to sing it again. Hell with it. I've done my singing. I want to go to the back of the line."
How about that tree? Did you ever wear a tree costume?
Oh no, that was we were doing the Tempest and the fantasy scene, and there were three electric trees that lit up as soon as we reached our posts on stage, and I was in that center post section, as a matter of fact, and I was the center tree, and again, Mr. Negan was at the a tree, another one over here, another post, and all 3 of us had to run on stage with these trees, with the poles, the apertures or whatever, these sort of things, and wires all hanging from them and things, and we couldn't afford to lose our timing, because one would pull the other and the tree would go funny and strange. So we all had to come out at a certain time, and Louis would always be eager to get home that night or something, so he'd go a little too fast, and we'd finally make it to these posts. We'd stand there, and at a given point, of course, on would come these lights. So now we'd become lit for a long period of time. It seemed to be 10, 20 minutes or whatever. And there goes your flasher.
End of tape, maybe?
It's almost, but you...
Almost end of tape.
Oh, 2 minutes.
Okay, just wrap that one up. Is there, can we wind that up, the tree thing? Yeah.
Well, there isn't, I'm not sure.
As I mentioned, maybe I mentioned, I'm not sure, I wanted to talk a little bit of the radio and TV stuff. Were you involved in all in, say, first of all, the schools broadcasts that were coming out of Toronto here? 6 in the morning.
Not that much here, a bit in Winnipeg, but very little there as well. They had a schools broadcast thing from Winnipeg and from Toronto. Not as much. I remember doing a bit of it, but I wasn't one of the regulars. I did do some early work, not early for those people I'm about to mention, but it's certainly early for me. Andrew Allen and S.E. Young and some very fine radio producers. And again, there was something quite stable and safe and wonderful about that, all bread and butter kind of activity, radio, and I still like doing it. But so there was that, and there was a certain fun in early live television and so on. It's scary, but still good, a good thing to have done. And there was some of that done in Winnipeg. None of it is done now. The regional thing has been cut back incredibly over the years. Yeah.
I've only heard this glossed over, actually, yeah. Or I didn't read see the whole thing. You got in trouble for makeup once. Really live TV. A little cotton in the cheeks and so forth. And there was a whole kissing of a girl scene. Let me beg of you to relate that story to me, so I can get the facts.
You don't want to hear that story. I forget what I forget the name of the play right now, but it was a first live network drama. It wasn't the first live show out of Winnipeg. First live network drama, and there were good people involved in it. Scary proposition, and the word network first began to have some meaning for me. I was lucky, since I was doing stage work, leads, one of the few who are doing leads on stage kind of thing, lucky to get some of that early television work. And I was a prisoner in a certain kind of show. It had Rebel in the title, and I was on a bed of straw in a cell at the beginning of the program, and it was only a half hour, and I was to I guess just kind of lie there and lick my wounds, because I'd been beaten up very badly by guards or whoever. Well, I was not satisfied with the amount of makeup that they'd put on me. Being the young actor who wanted more and more of everything, I added some stuff myself, a few other bruises and cuts, and including a whole ball of gauze, strips of gauze. It had to be a mile of it. And I put it in my teeth, like this. And I'm on this bed of straw, and there was a set of bars between myself and a young girl, the girl in the play, very pretty girl. And she wanted to ask me something about her father. And she came up to the bars and she said, "Did you see my father?" And I'm terrified. We had 3 weeks rehearsal on this. So it's an awful lot of rehearsal for a half-hour show going network right across the country. My mother had heard me on radio, but she'd never seen me. This is something quite new. I've got to say, I'm lying on the straw, and I heard her, and I crawled over to one of the bars, disguised, which was a mic, disguised as a bar. And this lovely actress was on the other side of the bars. And I heard her sing, and obviously I'd overdone it. And I had a whole page of dialogue. I had a whole speech. But when I was singing, I was far too much stuff. And I dried. The words went right out of my head. I had no idea where I was. And her eyes got larger, and mine got larger. And we looked at each other, and I kind of rose a little, tried to get away from the microphone for some silly reason, didn't know what else to do, reached through the bars, and I took her by the head. No reason on the face of the earth why I should have done this. And I kissed her. I went, till I could remember the lines. There was nothing in the script that suggested I should even try this. So now I can see one of her eyes was like a frightened deer's eye, like this. And I thought, okay. And then I remembered the line. And when I pulled my face away from hers, first of all, the bars were that far away, apart, and her cheekbones were about that far apart. And these bars had been freshly, nicely painted by the CBC. So now she's got 2 marks here. Her eyes are still gorgeous. But from her nose down, all of this makeup, all the garbage that I've been putting on my face for 4 hours before we started the show or whatever, everything that I added, everything ended up on her, including this gauze from in here was now attached and was like beautifully lit by the CBC. Was like the bridge on a river choir or something, going from my mouth to hers. And again, beautiful eyes. And she wanted to look so nice for her folks on show that night. And I felt so bad. Well, I saw this and I went back for another kiss because I couldn't, I tried again. I went boop, back again. I spent most of that half hour kissing this girl. And in those days, they used to put the titles on a roll drum. And whoever was in charge of the roll drum swore to me at the cast party afterwards he was going to rush down and change the title to The Kiss or something. It took forever. I think I was the only one who showed up at the cast party. I think everyone was so fed up with that show. Anyway, I might have been the only one who went on to become an actor. She became a painter, I think, in Vancouver. And very good painter, from what I understand. Brian McDonald was in it, the choreographer. His one and only acting job. I don't think he acted again. And so that was that. And some years later, I got the jump and give you the capper on this because the opening of the Sky Dome, they had a bunch of us, so-called well-known people or whatever, parading around in open cars on the floor of the Sky Dome. And they had dancers and singers and so on. And they had a makeup situation, a segment there set up. A girl came towards me, very pretty girl, serious looking. "I know you," she said. And I said, "Oh, yes? You know my mother." That was her mother, the actress, this lovely person. But she looked exactly like her mother. And I've never done my own makeup since.
It doesn't dredge up bad feelings, eh? It's all...
I don't know.
That's beautiful. Pre Marlon Brando too, right?
Yes.
Andrew Allen, you worked with him quite a bit then? We just mentioned radio, we didn't talk about
Yes. Not quite a bit. Certainly not in the way that most of the Toronto radio actors had. When I had arrived, they'd been going, doing a tremendous amount of work. We had our Winnipeg version of Andrew, and but I must have done, I don't know, not that many, maybe a dozen shows, something like that with Andrew.
Who was the Winnipeg guy?
Gus Christensen was his name. Don't know where he is now, I don't know what his story was, obviously retired.
Was he a contender, would you say?
Yes, could have been, I guess. Entirely different sort of sensibility, I think, than Andrew and Esther. Both of them seemed born to it, to the job.
Did you know the story about Andrew's Atlantic crossing?
Vaguely,
Scarlet Hill, Forest Rangers. Working on a series like that with comparatively difficult technological, more primitive, weren't they, in those days?
Mm-hmm.
Scarlet Hill was the...
Scarlet Hill, the first, I suppose, the first...
Start again.
Okay, open the door, eh?
Yeah.
Could you tell me what was Scarlet Hill? Could you repeat Scarlet Hill?
The first live, let's start again. Scarlet Hill was the soap opera. And took up a period of time in the 60s, early 60s, whatever. Matter of fact, when I came back from Stratford, during that momentous first year, the year of my singing debut, I went straight to Scarlet Hill and got a taste of what it was like to run this stuff and just shoot week after week, or story after story, and 3 or 4 things, half hours, in a day kind of thing, and I could see where all that stuff was. I didn't do many of them. I did some, but and then I went on to do other things. I had this dread about doing anything for any length of time. And ordinarily, an actor would feel pretty good about that. You know, a long-running play or a long-running series. I couldn't quite get over the joy that I think I could find in doing many, many, many kinds of things. Truth is, after all this time, I still haven't done anywhere near the amount or the kinds of, you know, numbers that I would like to have done in different kinds of things. Either, you know, I sometimes blame myself that I haven't really stayed with any one given thing. Stage, TV, film, this, that, whatever. I'm even writing, you know, to round out the career, to get a full look at it, and direct and so on. But those are things that the Canadian has to do, I think, at times. Some, anyway.
Did that early TV suit you, though, in terms of the schedules, in terms of the...
I liked it. But I could see where after a year or two you'd get pretty fat and foolish. I think just doing the same sort of thing over and over and over again. Material, of course, it's essential to have the good words. So if the thing was well written and the audiences liked it, that created a whole other new experience for you and a whole other terrific feeling. Going across the country, being known not in a silly way, but I mean in some sort of sense, ego sense. But the making of friends, and you felt as though you could go almost anywhere, and they sort of you'd meet up with people who had seen your work, and you felt friendly towards them. And I think because it was not simply from the entertainment standpoint, but from the standpoint of communications, and I've always felt that I wanted to connect. And Canadian television at that time had a way of doing that. You could span the country just by turning in a very good performance or telling stories that people would like to hear.
Would you describe as drama The Forest Rangers?
Forest Rangers? Drama, well, you know, the kids series, very well done at the time, done in color, and all that. Still holds up fairly well on Showcase and a few other areas. Again, it hadn't been going on for a long, long time, the idea of film series. You know, film series were, you know, that American element was there. Tugboat Annie, Last of the Mohicans, Hudson Bay Company, all of those kinds of series that were being done, originating elsewhere and coming here to shoot. That was going on even then. So there was that. And then when our own thing started and so on, there was something quite special about it. And being seen on a steady basis on television gave you a certain kind of name. Better then than it is now, because in fact there was so little at that time. The channels were very few, and it's good fun to be able to know that you were in that kind of, you know, that many homes at that time. And there's still areas here where they're seeing a channel or whatever, and it's good fun.
Was there a John Hirsch equivalent in the television that could knock you off your, say, your high horses kind of thing? If it started getting to your head, say, I was intimidated when I first came to Toronto. Intimidated by the fact that, again, all of these people that I had got to know by seeing them on the screen from Winnipeg, who had already begun this television regime here, wonderful actors doing tremendous work. And if they were intimidating, then surely the people in charge of production were, and they were to me. I remember the actors here walking the hallways, waiting for the mimeographed sheets that come out of hot off the presses, telling you what new shows were coming on, what shows would be up for casting. And a bunch of us actors would go down in our wash and wear suits, and we'd stand around waiting to be seen by, or going in to see, or trying to, some of these very powerful people, who at that time had created some very fine stuff on television. And basically it was that. It was a short life there of that as well, just simply going to get these kinds of things. I remember thinking all I needed was one speaking part and one non-speaking part to pay my rent, you know, a month.
So we all enjoyed that. It was like it must have been the way the old studio system felt, in Hollywood, where all the supports and featured players and so on were hanging around the hallways waiting for work. This was a very, very busy community. Toronto was just really humming, the amount of production that was done, the dramas, and the festival, General Motors Presents, and Play Date, and all kinds of things. Tons of variety, excitement.
I've really run to the end of my questions, but I did want to ask you something just that came up. You mentioned the Free Press critic Frank Morris. As it happens, we're often talking about Nathan Cohen, we're often talking about Herbert Whittaker, and criticism has been coming up. We talked to Herbert Whittaker this summer. Frank Morris, would you describe him as a very competent critic? Or?
I think he was. He was a good man. I think he had a sense of loftiness that perhaps seemed to suit, or he thought it suited, the job of critic. A certain kind of aloofness. I couldn't afford to be too involved in the performing entity because, in fact, he was writing about us, and in a smaller community, that was kind of dangerous. Donnelly Rhodes' mother, Anne Henry, did exactly the same for the Winnipeg Trib. And you would meet them once or twice a year at functions. You felt a lot better meeting them after they had given you a good review than if in fact they had torn you apart. You didn't go looking for that kind of attention. But for the most part, they represented that necessary kind of entity, and they were the official critics at the time. There would be no reason to think they weren't, or qualified, or any other, anything else. They were good at their work, and Frank was most helpful. He had been elsewhere. He had done the Hollywood trek. That was even happening at that point, where journalists would get that opportunity to go to LA and see things that were being done, so they could keep up to what was happening. And he knew the scene down here as well. A lot of us performers at that time thought we'd go straight from the Winnipeg stage to New York. That was our plan. In fact, we stopped off in Toronto, or I stopped off in Toronto, and I'm sure others did, and thought, well, might as well beat it here. Try to beat it anyway. And Frank was not always in touch, and we didn't always have the opportunity to be in touch, but they were good people, and they cared so much for local theatre, cared so much. I don't remember a feeling of such congeniality, in a sense of togetherness, that sense of we're all here for the same reason kind of thing. Let's improve, let's have good stuff to see, and you could feel it with them as well, and they were part of that, celebration, I think.
Did you know Herb Whittaker at all, by the way?
Herb directed me once. Directed me in a play called Noah at the New Play Society. And Herb also, a friend of Frank Morris, by the way, and that was a connection. And I had come to see Herb. I had gone to see him on Frank's advice. And so from the very beginning, from the time I came to Toronto, Herb was on my side, in a sense, And very good man. Extremely good man. Again, a great lover of the theatre, a great fine friend of performers and for this way of life. He would always be there. Always be there. You knew there was that was it. He helped make up that picture, that Toronto picture of all of the varying aspects. That put together the Toronto scene. Quite a special community, quite a place.
Any comments on Nathan Cohen, who's sort of really controversial?
Very much so, and again, there was that sort of stand back kind of thing. This is my job, it's not like yours, it never will be. I do what I do. He turned out to be, but even though he was quite, I guess aloof or whatever. I mean, one has every right to have their own life. he had his and was separate in many ways from most of the activity, except for that one job: go and do and write about. And Charm was great. He loved Charm, loved her work, gave her great reviews. It's wonderful to watch that. And of course he hosted Famous Words and things of that nature on TV. And again, one of those very striking characters. That sort of. I often thought at one point I'd like to sit down, if I had the time, to try to create a kind of a landscape or a mural of some kind. Some mural should exist somewhere, taking in the stretch of people that have been standouts in our industry in this country. I always thought I'd like to do that, but that basically would be a sort of a local thing. I also thought there should be a kind of a series, and to some extent you're doing it now, but I would love to have hosted a show made up of 10-minute or 15-minute clips on every known actor in other communities as well, because every community would have its own favorite people. And God, you could get 20 of them in Stratford alone playing cricket, you know. But they need more. There's something they've sort of been dropped. People that didn't have the opportunities to continue and make bigger names for themselves in the present kind of scene. And it's I wish it hadn't gone that way to some extent. People like Eric House, and whom I call the legendary Eric House, and he's sure some legend, you know. But really he is, to my way of thinking. These are people who put it together in the first place. I mean, you know, Michelangelo might have had a good brush, but if his scaffold was no good, then that was not a great thing. Well, these people were the scaffold. These performers, these directors and writers and people who stayed and did their thing at the beginning. The Eric Houses and marvelous performers, the Bill Hutts at Stratford and so on, and the Kates and Marthas. Wonderful performers. And it seems odd that this is a country that really can let them go without a goodbye cup of coffee even, sometimes. Which is not quite right. And I don't know exactly what you do with everyone. But we should be very happy, I think, that it was, you know. And it means a great deal to those of us to have belonged to it. You know.
I think end of tape 4.
End of tape 4?
That's it. It almost sounds like we need a Vietnam Wall for a dramatic community.
It's weird.
It's kind of black.
Yeah.
But still, the people were in it for the joy of it.
But that was one thought that I had at one point. I'd love to go and interview them in a way that, for just 10 or 15 minutes, show clips of their careers, of shows they've done, to remind the public that roster is out there. It was out there. And when the new CBC started, for example, you can walk church or over in this area, and I started to see people that weren't even given a goodbye from that corporation. People who put in 40 years on radio, 30 and 40 years. Whew, gone, just gone.
We get the gold watch even.
Didn't get to go on.
No. They wanted.
Anyway, some will say that's the life they chose, and I guess it's all right. This has been nice. Thank you, JD.